Hey, it's simple. You're watching Thorin channel.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Thorin's Big Brains. Right, my guest for this episode is going to be Mahone, who you might know. Actually, he has a decent amount of subs now, to be fair. I was going to make one of those jokes that I do when I have like King T on, where it's like, if you're one of 300 people sub to his channel. Because for some reason, people on the fucking CSGO subreddit, they click the videos, but the amount of them that don't click the sub button, it's like, just go ahead and click that. You know you like the video anyway. Why are people, why are some of the people that are wicked on like 2k subs or whatever the fuck? Get that number pumped up. So anyway, not only may you have seen him on YouTube, obviously there's a whole group of people who do those videos with the distracts breakdowns, but I think he's probably one of the more better known ones, Mahone. But more recently, not only did he have a whole bunch of his videos actually featured on the I Am Katowice broadcast, and he just recently released those on his channel and made a whole playlist of them, so they're not just lost to the broadcast forever, because if people don't know, one of the downsides of those broadcasts is they might leave the Twitch VOD up that's like 7 hours long, but some of that content never goes to YouTube, you know. Like, as I always tell people, the joke is, like, it's a good job I actually have a whole career that ain't just desk analysis, mate, because imagine how depressing my career would be if it was desk analysis. They delete half the fucking clips I was ever in. Like, oh my god, all my best work, my magnum opuses, they're just gone, because when you go to YouTube and you type in that game I just did, that amazing, you know, the game just starts, doesn't it, to the pistol. It's like, what the fuck? What was I doing my whole career for? But anyway, we're back now, and there's also another detail you might know about Mahone, which is that he was an analyst for NiP last year, and partnership with them ended towards the end of the year. I actually want to start there just briefly, right? I do understand, and by the way, knowing the NiP org, I'm going to go ahead and guess for a certainty there's a special clause in there about what you can reveal and stuff when you've left, you know, and you can very But with that said, I thought I'd ask a very broad question, because basically, if you've seen any of the talk shows or the analysis desks last year when we got to the lands, the main topic around NiP was actually essentially like, what is going on with their T-sides? Like, what is Hampus doing as an IGL? Like, if you know, famously, they used to win like 12 CT rounds and then they'd still win a game like 16-14. And you were like, what? What's going on here? And even though they actually had a whole bunch of good players, obviously that Device, Hampus, Rezi, and a bunch of people who could have put up big numbers, they did seem to have something in the era when they had Device in the team specifically just seemed a bit off with the T-sides. So listen, obviously you are just the analyst, you're not the coach or the IGL. It's not your fault, literally. Like, I'm not like, why didn't you get 4 rounds? But I just wondered, do you have any sort of like big picture things you could tell us? Like, what do you think some of the issues of that lineup maybe were? Because obviously, to be fair, this is mostly the period before they had Essa tag in. Obviously now they don't have Device. It's kind of a different squad now. They've even changed coach, obviously. They've got DJL instead of Threat. And in fact, I'd even say that's probably the last detail I actually think is why a lot of people didn't call out NiP, by the way, dude, is because so many of us from the old school really respect Threat. And I think a lot of people felt a bit awkward that they were essentially flaming his work, or like, what would they do on T-sides? So give me some thoughts. What do you think happened with that squad last year?
Ooh, I think this is a combination of things, some technical, some more mental. One of the big things I would say, though, is that on the T side, after the M4A1S buff, it was a really tough time for us. I think that was a big factor. But I think outside of that, we also just struggled with the way we executed things. I think sometimes we kind of overcomplicated it a little bit. And even if it's good, if it's not executed in like the perfect way, then it's not going to work, right? Sometimes the spacing might be slightly off. Maybe somebody misses a nade somewhere. It's those kind of details where if you don't get it right and you have such a refined tactic, that's where it all messes up, because then at that point, you don't really have like a plan B, right? And then that's something that we tried to implement a little bit more afterwards, where, hey, let's just say if the round kind of breaks down and if things don't go the way that we want it to, we need to know what we're actually going to do afterwards. And what was a little bit unfortunate, I would say, was that like after our win at IM Fall, you know, we had our confidence was at an all-time high, obviously, right? And I think something that we kind of made a mistake with, maybe both coaching staff-wise and player-wise, was that we were a little bit scared to really overhaul the entire system. We knew our T-sides weren't as good, but we were scared to really make the changes that could make the big difference in like being able to make a big run at the major. And I think afterwards, like, you know, after we picked up Essa tag, that's when we were rejigging more of our T-sides. But then one of the problems that kind of came up was more so that we would do these things in practice, right? We'd be executing some of the newer ideas that we had very well, but it didn't translate to the officials. And I think that's one of the biggest factors where it started becoming more technical, but then it started becoming a bit more mental. It could be due to the fact that there were arena events. I'm not too sure, right? But
I could play a factor, sure, yeah. Yeah. One thing I want to ask him just briefly before I move on, because we can talk about NiP now, obviously they're actually an interesting team to discuss, is just actually the IGL Hampus, because obviously that was another point of discussion, because if people don't know, even though he has been in IGL for many years, obviously going back to the squads like Red Reserve and stuff years and years ago, the difference is, like from what I remember of him as a player, is he's only just essentially developed his individual style, though the last couple of years it's like amazing like lurk style, where he somehow gets all these crazy flanks off, and everyone knows like individually, he does seem like he has a really interesting mind for the game. The problem I had is though, I almost felt like if I watched those NiP games and I didn't know he was the IGL, I just think he was just doing a banging job. But if I hear he's the IGL as well, I always wondered if there was like a disconnect there, because the problem is essentially if you're playing some kind of like semi-permanent lurk where you're trying to find weird timings on people, that seems a bit weird to also then to be able to like call a strat from, or to even call a CT rotation from, because realistically you're kind of thinking of one thing, whereas like the Entropiq's over the other side of the map, or the other you're flanking behind so that you're not on the site they're going to hit. It must have made it a bit trickier to kind of like calm and set up what you want and execute, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Hampus is world class at what he does with his lurks and being able to find the timings, right? But yeah, that is a downside to calling in that way, because you're not with the pack. You don't have all the information, right? And I think Hampus is aware of this as well. And this is something that we even talked about before, leading up to the major. If this was something that we can kind of, have him be in a spot where he can make better calls without having to be in that particular lurk position. But we decided not to do that kind of approach. And in some ways it could be our downfall, but in some ways it was also what made, Hampus so good. I think one of the big things though is that as a leader, things could be different now with DJL obviously, right? But one of the big things that he needed to work with was getting the most out of his players. He was really good at getting the most out of himself, right? There's no question about that.
Yeah, true.
But being able to get the most out of everybody else on the team, that was a struggle, especially when you have names like Rez, Plopsky, where, they weren't necessarily having the best year of their careers there. And there were some moments of shining, but there wasn't that consistency that we really needed.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing I would say that is quite cool, though, about that period is, if it had just been that we were only judging him as an IGL, I think, unfortunately, people might actually be asking for him to be removed now. But I notice most people seem to be on the same train I am, which is like, even if I was going to bring an IGL in, I'd still keep this guy and just have him play the fucking stuff he's doing now, because I genuinely think the fact that he's the IGL has made fans not actually appreciate how good what he does individually. Because to me, it really is like, it's in the vein of the obvious comparison is when Art first came on the scene all those years ago, and again, because the joke was, we all thought like, this will be figured out in a month. It was like, if anything, it's the other way around. It's everyone else had to like constantly keep updating their shit to figure out what new sort of stuff this maniac got. So to me, if you actually had like a real world beta team, this would be a mega valuable piece to have to kind of like be the wild card element,
Yeah, definitely. I kind of think of it as like, kind of like the fur of the SK era.
There you go.
That's kind of like what Hampus is like. And it's always valuable to have a player like that, but it's very difficult to have this player also be the caller, because there's only so much information you can really get from your players unless you're asking them very specific questions like, oh, do you see exactly this? Do you see exactly this? It's hard to pull that off.
One thing that is good, though, is because I looked exactly when you left NiP, because it was right at the end of last year, right? Technically, if I ask you now about what you think about the device situation, you can just speculate like a pleb, like anyone else would in the show, and it doesn't have to be any secret information. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on this topic, right? Obviously, it's a bit tricky to just totally have opinions on, because since device left, citing like mental health issues and the fact that if people don't know, he actually left during an active tournament. He left when they got to the semi-final of IEM Winter, where like actually maybe he could have won that tournament. So that suggested to me it was, at least at that time, fairly serious, and he obviously literally didn't want to play. People don't know he hasn't played since. He didn't play the World Finals of Blast. Obviously he hasn't played any of the tournaments since. But the crazy thing is, we haven't really even heard anything either. It's been months and months now. Like, the story, as far as we know, stays the same. And then he also did throw an interesting wrinkle in, which is we all began to speculate. Like, obviously, everyone kept saying, like, either he is going to Australia, or people were just like, wouldn't it be an obvious move because they had the whole Lockie situation? But then he himself came out and did that tweet where he sort of, like, tried to, like, put the kibosh on that and be like, please respect my time off or whatever. Whatever he did. So it worked in the short term. But the problem with this is, it's too many months now, device. Now we have to fucking open the Pandora's box and start figuring out what's going on. So I wanted to know on your end, right? If you had to guess now, just vibe, what you think logically, theory crafting, do you think device comes back to NiP? Do you think he's an NiP player again one day? What would you pick?
I do think he'll come back. eventually, right? In terms of how long he's actually going to stay, I'm not too sure.
Right.
But I can confirm that like around the time when he did take that break, leading up to those tournaments, he was in rough shape, right? And I don't just mean playing wise, I also mean more mentally, right? He was in a rough spot.
Right.
It's not in my place to actually talk about it.
Sure.
But I can confirm that he was in a rough spot mentally. And, I hope for the best for him to actually be able to get back on the server and start playing, because if he can get back to that form and get into the right mental space, he can be a very good piece for NiP.
Oh, absolutely. Because the interesting part to me is this, because there was all that story out there, right? And it seemed to be coming from not just like random people on like HLTV forums. Like I actually was hearing people in the industry also sort of like either just outright speculate or just suggest like, I think maybe he's going back or whatever. So, right, it putting it in people's minds, at least it's a possibility maybe he goes elsewhere. I don't know where. I personally don't know that it would be to Astralis. I think that's the angle that I found a bit less interested about that. Obviously, there's other squads would obviously want to top AWPer, and he's one of the most decorated players of all time. But here's what I want to ask is this. To me, because I was wondering, maybe he chooses not to return, or maybe part of when he's better, he just decides, right, the project didn't work, I'm just going to go back. You guys can go Swedish again or whatever if you want to do that approach. The angle that made me look at that whole Brolan move totally differently, though, dude. Because there's two ways you can look at that I think are the obvious two ways. I might be wrong completely, of course, pure speculation. There's two ways. One could be, that's how you get Device back. You go, oh, remember when you were playing great Device, but like, the other players were like good stylistically, but you didn't have enough firepower. So we got you Brolan. There you go. Because I tell you what, you can't complain if you wanted players and you're going to speak in Swedish. That is the best player available that's not in NiP. He's mega. So on the one hand, that'd be a great way to bring him back and go, let's reboot for next year. But the other angle, listen, I've been in the game a long time. I have to be cynical, mate. I have to cover my ass. The other angle is this. Tell you what, if I ever had to one day announce, that amazing Device signing, I'm afraid he's going. It'd be brilliant if I could say it, but good news, we got Brolan though. That would be a great way also to sort of like do the old Indiana Jones, like put the thing and put the thing. So what do you think there's any likelihood on either of those? Like I said, they're pure speculation. I'm not coming from any inside info there, of course.
Yeah, I have no idea from my side, right? But I think it is very exciting if NiP can get Brolan, right? I think the number one question would be, who do you actually get for him, right? I think there's some speculation on who those players might be that they replace, right? But in either case, getting Brolan would be really, really good. And if there's a possibility where they can actually play together, then that's when I really think NiP can do some damage, right? Because I think part of it was that, there wasn't that much firepower on the team, right? In terms of, you look at the roster last year, we didn't have that many great pieces other than Device, right? He was the only top 20 player on the team, but we still got a good amount of results out of our team.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that being able to bring Brolan in to be able to do that, where he can be another top 20 player, and then hopefully Hampus continues on this trajectory where he's becoming a top 20 player as well. NiP can be a very dangerous team. And especially I also hear that DJL, their coach, I hear one of the biggest strengths for him is that he's able to discipline the team well. And that's something that was maybe not enforced as well last year, where if they can do that and have all these pieces, NiP, they can be a very strong team next year. But that's if all the pieces come together.
Yeah, if people don't know, that would obviously, if you know the personality of Threat, I've known him many, many years, that would obviously be one of his few downsides as a coach, is he's just not a very strict guy, he's not the guy who's going to come in and shout, what do you all do? Like, he's more the guy who just politely asks you, like, could you please do this and this? Like, so, yeah, he's not a general, put it out with. So, I'd imagine this guy's a little bit rougher if you look at the fucking background he's from, some teams he's had to fucking coach. He hasn't been, excuse me, Rez, could you please, he hasn't been doing that, as he's just been fucking working with all the tier 3 guys, and so I would hope he's like that. Here's the thing as well, though, dude. If they can keep Device and get Brolan, I don't think fans have thought this through, because one of the problems when fans make teams is they just do it like HLTV forum style, where they just put 5 names together and you're like, dude, you are aware there's like roles in the game, like how am I going to have Coldzera and Niko and like, I don't know, fucking Get Right in the same team? There's no space. That's like complexity last year, you dickhead. Like, there's no space, there's 3 people's roles are all one. But if you look at this, I don't think people get it. The 3 players you must keep is obviously Device, Hampus and Brolan, right? If you get those 2 and Brolan, I don't think people, there's no role overlap. There's no, you could literally have all 3 doing what they do best in the same team. That is the makings of like a top team. That's like a team that could go deep in a major.
Absolutely. That's what I think as well.
Right, what about this then? Because the other thing I want to ask about is it must be wild for you as well, because I find this experience myself, but I want to know for someone inside the team. Right, on paper, you remember last year, there was tournaments where Device would post, like, he'd be top 10 in the tournament in stats, but as you said, the firepower of the others sometimes missing. So if you told me he's going out, especially this is the AWP as well, and then I'm putting an academy player as the AWP replacement, right, the first thing I'd tell you, obviously, after watching years of Counter-Strike, mate, is don't expect the results to be anywhere close. This is what I want to ask you, dude. I don't know how they're doing it, because all the games, I'm not even joking, I've almost never seen this team just get smashed and blown out since they've had the stand-ins. Like, it's almost inconceivable how well they play. So do you have some sense, like, what do they do you think, differently without Device? Or how do they make up for not having one of the world's best players?
Yeah, I think one of the big things about NiP that people may not realize is that, there's actually a good amount of structure in the way that we actually kind of approach things, right? Maybe not so much like, we're an easy team to read, but in the way that we kind of work together, right? So even though Device isn't there, right, even though he brings a lot of the frags, right, I do think in some way it actually opens up space for the other players to actually get more involved, right? So people like Rez, that's why you see he's starting to show up a little bit more. Same with Plopsky as well, right? Maybe because Device is gone, like it kind of opens up that space. But, maybe another part of it that, I don't want to speak for the players here, obviously. Another part of it could be that, maybe psychologically there isn't that much pressure on the team now that Device isn't there, right? Everybody knows, like, okay, this is only a temporary team. We just got to make the most out of it, right? And like I mentioned before, last year, where towards the end of the year, it was a problem for us translating what we did in scrims to officials, right? And that's because there wasn't as much pressure in scrims, right? But then as soon as you get to those officials, especially when you play arena events, that's when the pressure's on and that's when things kind of melt down. So I wouldn't be surprised if NiP right now, they're kind of on that trajectory where it's kind of like, there isn't that much pressure. So, it's not really that big of a deal. And hence everybody can kind of get the best out of themselves currently.
It's interesting that you also cited the M4A1S change getting stronger, basically cheaper. Everyone knows it made the CT side super strong now. And the problem is, I always say this, like, there's a dilemma that you have as an analyst in CS, which is because you can't really tell Valve what to do, or rather they won't listen and they won't do it, right? You just have to sort of figure out, can I accept the change they've made? And the problem goes like this. I've had a rule for the last 2 years, which is any change that makes CT side stronger, I must accept, because I fucking hate how broken the T side is in the economy. So I have to sort of like just go where it sort of weighs them a bit. But I have to say, some of the effects I don't think we saw, because if people remember, that change wasn't like, wasn't that in the middle of the year that they did the M4A1 chess? When was it? It would be when the Riptide one was, right? I wonder, I'll try checking that. When was Riptide?
I don't remember in terms of operations, but I just remember it was just before IM fall. So that had to have been.
Yeah, exactly. So it was right before the lands. Yes, perfect. Yeah, you're right. So, yeah, exactly. And of course, yes, because before that tournament, everyone was crying that everyone's going to use all the utility. And basically, we all thought everyone would do that Alexi B shot and does too. But luckily, everyone's so lazy in CS, almost no one did anything. So it actually ended up working out for everyone, thankfully. But yeah, that's true. Right. So this is one thing I don't think people factored in, dude. Everyone focused so much on fucking Gambit because it was all about the LAN thing. Like, wow, they're on LAN now. Look, the crowd. Which, to be fair, does look like it has played a factor. But I wondered about that. No one thought that through. Like, the time when they were the most dominant team online was before we had this CT change. Now remember, they were already arguably the best CT team, so I doubt it helped them that much to get like a better CT weapon. But I did think to myself, if you're a rookie team and you're going online in front of a crowd, all these like extra factors you have to factor in, if it's also essentially just harder to get a T-side round, to get in the site, to plant, to get the opening kill, that's going to make it even trickier in that regard. I don't think people factored that in, I do think that affected like the balance of power in the world, sort of,
Yeah, it definitely did. I mean, just with the price being lower, right? Because with the price being lower also means more nades for the CTs, right?
There you go,
also
yeah.
Means different ways to defend. And as well, something that's a little bit more understated is that you can spam through smokes. And there's always a split second where as you're coming in as a T towards the site, there's a split second where if you have the silencer, you don't quite know where that shot is coming from, right? So all those factors kind of, made a difference. I think over time now, though, teams have started to adjust and become a little bit better for it. But then, just that, short month or month and a half or whatever, that's when teams weren't quite as accustomed to, oh man, we got to deal with all this stuff. And also having to think about the nade dropping thing too, right?
True.
Although it didn't impact the game in the same way that people thought it would when it first came out, there's still like things that kind of make it easier for the CTs to kind of shuffle nades and be able to use more powerful setups. Like, for example, like on Inferno towards B, you can drop your nades and then have you boost up and then have the other guy play somewhere with nades, right? That's something that wasn't quite possible without the update.
Yeah, true. Do you think there's any other teams that like either benefited or were nerfed a bit from some of the changes? Is there anyone you'd pick out that you think it helped or hurt?
Not exactly. I kind of think that it kind of affected everybody in the same way. For us though, like just because I was in the team, right? I felt like it affected us quite hard, right? Maybe not so much the actual nerf itself, but more so how the game was played and how we started perceiving it, right? Because, in some ways, I think part of the problem that we also had was maybe in some ways we were kind of blaming the update a little bit too much for our T sides when really we needed to get over it and basically find an actual way to be better at it, right? And not just be like, okay, we only need 5 T side rounds, right? And then just hope our CT side carries us. We actually need to find better and more real, tangible solutions.
Now it is all these months later. And as I said, like realistically, I think most fans who watch the games would even struggle to notice that many like key moments when you do the grade usage. As you say, they're the obvious ones. It's like if you want to be the guy who rotates over the A, you just drop the shit in the fucking construction, and he has all his nades to do the counter nades and flash. We know the basic ones, right? Can you think of any other? Like, what would you put forwards as? Have we actually seen any like legit innovation? Do you think because of the nade dropping? Like, is there any teams impress you with things that they do?
No, I don't really think so, right? I think for us, we tried doing more innovative stuff. I think people probably remember when we tried doing the Halls pop or device, there was like 5 flashes on Inferno. Right. We tried doing that, right? And the sucky thing about that was we did it in practice and it worked every single time. But of course, during the official, it goes wrong for whatever reason, right? But I think right now, so far, right, with the nade dropping, the most I see is just that it just kind of streamlines how people do things, right? So there's no more like, oh, this guy needs to get into this position. It's just, let me just give you my nades and then you do it, right? I think that's what it's solved a lot of. And as well, I think some teams are trying to figure out like on T side, how to fake more effectively with it, right? Obviously, people talk about, oh, you just throw all the nades all at once, right? But that's too obvious. So you have to think a little bit more about the timing of it, right? Maybe there's a specific lineup that you use where it's more geared towards, okay, if one guy is going to throw these 2 nades, he needs to use this lineup instead so that it doesn't look obvious that one person is throwing 2 nades. Those are the kind of things that I think it's starting to go more towards. But in general, I think it's still going to be maybe like a year from now until we really see the tangible effects of the nade dropping update. I think nobody's just thought of actual good solutions and how you should actually use it yet.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with the example you gave, obviously, is that's what everyone thought. Everyone said, they'll just throw all 5 smokes and flashes and then go to B or whatever. It's like, that's because you'd all only had 5 minutes to think of the applications. Like the obvious way when it was announced that it would be used is like, you would essentially do those ones where it's like you do a slow take of a site where like the smoke comes in first, so then you have to throw the counter utility. It's more like that. You get extra utility drawn out of them, or you do like what was going to be a staggered rush anyway. That way it does look real that 2 people could throw all the flashes because they would be the ones throwing the flashes while people come in. So, yeah, to me, it was more obvious to go that way. I will say, though, I'm actually a little bit almost underwhelmed no one figured out how to break CS, and that it just ended up being like an okay addition. Because it just shows, like, the problem with CS always, dude, is players in a way, it's not that they're lazy, they just do what works. That's the problem. And so either you have to be the guy, this is so hard if you're going to be a coach, you either have to convince them this is the next shit that if you do, you're going to be ahead. And by the way, trying to convince them of that is like, holy fuck, that's one of the hardest conversations you ever have in your life. Because they'll even say dumb stuff to you like, but why is it Gambit doing it? You know what I mean? Like, because they haven't thought of it yet, you idiot, I'm the one telling you. But that's just the way their brains work. They assume the best players are all doing the best shit. So I have to say, like, I think that's one of those areas where I'm just looking down the line, because, the worst example ever is the fucking Krieg, where, like, low-key, it was just in the game the whole time from the beginning. And, like, if you did go back in time, that is just what you'd do. You'd just use that gun from day one and you'd be a god, wouldn't you? But the joke is back then, even when people might know the 2 famous spray players, Elysian Magus, did every now and then use it. But the joke is even they somehow sort of couldn't get out of that mental prison that like a top player doesn't do that. Like I guess for them the logic really was like, well then what, why doesn't Niko use it if it's that good? Like he uses an AK still. So I know it sounds weird to fans, but like that doesn't mean there isn't anything there. There might be loads of room for innovation. It's just that players, they aren't always even looking for that. I always say that, especially in games like CS where you play so many games, they're trying to win the next official game. They're not thinking 6 months in advance trying to build like the most next level era or some shit. You just try to win the next map, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like even if you have an idea that actually could work, it takes time to implement, right? Is even if you have a new idea that is going to work, it's going to take time to, iron things out, like, and figure out when do you actually use it, how do you actually use it, all that kind of stuff, right? Even with the Krieg, right? That's something where there's so many officials that happen all the time, right? Let's just even back in during that time where teams are actually traveling and stuff like that. It's like in those 2-3 scrims that you're just going to try to use the Krieg, and then when the official comes, are you going to gamble that your entire match relies on you getting a kill that you might have with the AK but didn't with the Krieg, right? Nobody wants that feeling. So, I think it's actually quite tough for like these tier 1 teams that have a lot of pressure when it comes to these particular matches. And because they're so close together, it's hard to just really grind and see if something actually works, right? I would actually recommend that, for tier 2, tier 3 teams, and I'm sure they already do this, where they're the ones that actually try to push the game forward, right? They try to innovate because they have to get the edge over these teams in some way. Because fundamentally, a lot of the tier 1 teams are like the best at what they do, right? But they don't have the time to really figure out if the Krieg is good, right? That's where a tier 2, tier 3 team figures out, hey, this is worthwhile to do because, with the amount of matches they play, it's all like just one big blur. Where I hear, even for Young Ninjas back when they played tier 2, it's like they just had officials all the time, right? They didn't really have real time to practice and stuff like that. So yeah, that's what I would say, where even if there is a thing that works, it's going to take some time for it to actually confirm that it works and apply it to high stakes matches.
Since for Katowice, you did those videos where it was like the breakdowns of all the different like teams on specific maps, etc. I wondered in that sense, maybe you can give me some insight. Like, obviously, it might have seemed weird because you did one for Faze, but then it wasn't Faze, was it? Because there was like 3 different versions of fucking Faze in the tournament because of all the standing scenario and people coming in. I wondered, did you see that? Do you think from what you actually saw in the matches, did they seem different when they used the stand-ins? Obviously, they're doing it for 2 different roles. Like, you replaced Rops as like a lurker at one point, and then obviously you replaced Rain in like the final. Did they seem like a different team, Faze Clan?
Yeah, in some ways they were. Like, I think on Mirage, for example, right? JKS, when Rops was out of the lineup, JKS basically took Rops' spot, like on T-side Mirage, right? He was always the A Palace player. But then what actually happened when Rain was actually taken out, some people thought that, he just immediately took Rain's positions, like he did everything that Rain did, but actually it was slightly different. It actually seemed more like Twist was actually doing more of what Rain would do on T-side Mirage, and then JKS would more so assume that Twist's role towards the underpass B area, that was something that was like slightly different. And even the way that they would call, right? Even on T-side's Mirage, a lot of the time Rain would be like the guy towards middle when they do a 4-1 towards A or towards B. They didn't call that as much when he was out of the lineup, right? And if they did, then Twist would be the person who actually goes out middle instead of JKS. So in some ways, if it's a direct swap where it's something like Robs for JKS, that's easy because JKS has played that kind of swap before. But for JKS to just do what Rain was doing and all those strats, they didn't quite go for that approach. They actually changed the game just a little bit so that it wasn't quite the same. Obviously, still tactics wise, like in terms of like how they take the sites, like it's still similar, but like in terms of like the overall approach, like from round to round, it was different.
Yeah, that's a very key insight, I thought, because I also heard similar things. If you looked at a lot of the interviews from the Faze players, I know on CT side they had a similar philosophy, which was more like, depending on who went out the team, other people were willing to also swap their spot to, get them, like, because their premise basically, as far as I can tell, was just make JKS as comfortable as possible. And it's like the rest of us that'll change. Instead, people often do it the opposite way around. It's like, bad luck, you're the standard, you just do whatever the fuck we don't, which, as people might know by now, as anyone who worked in an IP world, that's not the best approach always, or at least it's really good if you want that played on fucking red score at HLTV and every fan to say for him to fire him, so whatever. One thing I'll say that I thought was quite interesting though is, there was even a comment that Carrigan made when they won that I thought a lot of fans just missed, it went over their heads or something. You know when he made that comment where he said that in the Mirage game, like the epic 5 overtimes, he said it was one of the only times ever where he just ran out of the strat book and basically just threw it out and just started doing stuff on the fly. I don't think people thought this through. He can't have had that many fucking strats that like JKS could know what to do in if he's playing a totally different role than he even did earlier. Like that scenario, you'd be lucky if you got like 5 things you can do T-side. So if someone tells me I'm gonna have to play like 30 team rounds or something, like, yeah, that's a fucking incredible they won that game. That is actually insane when you think about it.
Yeah, I think at that point, right, when you get that many overtimes deep, it's actually more about the execution, right? It's like, it doesn't matter what strat you run, it's just, can you actually just do it well? Because then that's what really matters at that point. Because everything becomes a mind game when you're that many overtimes deep. It's at the point where it's like you just have to be able to execute better than the other team. And I don't mean like a strat execute, but I just mean trading, using your utility properly, like all that kind of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'll also say this as well, like, I actually thought, dude, I found it so weird, all this criticism recently of G2, because as far as I can tell, aside from that online Blast tournament, they've never had the real fucking team, have they? Like, obviously they had, like, the situation with Extaz at kind of eats here. Then, just in the background of Monacy's mind, he had all that shit that's going on between his country and Ukraine. Then you come to Pro League, and they only got Alexi B, the IGL, back for, like, the last 2 matches or something ridiculous, and they already basically had to just win out completely in, like, dominant fashion. So, like, as much as, look, I get it, if you want to go, like, extreme, people, if you say this, but if you have Niko and those, you should sort of like be able to win some of these games anyway. Yeah, I sort of agree. But at the same time, like, I don't feel like, I don't know how anyone can judge G2, dude, because to me, I don't really feel like I've seen the real G2. I've seen lots of like potential and it looks really good, but like, I'm not really down on them right now, dude. I think it looks like a mega project. I'm looking forward to see what can happen with it. Where's your head at with G2?
Yeah, I actually think the same thing. I think G2, they need some time, and it doesn't help that all these tournaments, there's some sort of piece missing, right? It feels like every single player or coach even, like they're an important part of the team. And if one of them is missing, you're not getting the full deal, right? I will say, though, that there is maybe a little bit of, it is a little bit justified that Niko maybe not performing as well as he should be, right? But, I'm willing to let it slide a little bit just because of the circumstances of the team. But overall, I think G2, they still have a lot of things that they need to iron out, but it's not really a cause for concern yet. It's only been like 2 tournaments. And yeah, like you said, it's like, it's not even the full G2 yet.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think I said on one of my other shows, it's like if everyone else is out, like this would be the stock I would just be fucking going all in on. This is the one that's going to the moon. Look at these pieces. And that's, by the way, with the current piece. Like, the joke is, what I saw from Monacy at Katowice here, like, let's be real, he's not supposed to be the best player in the team. They've got Niko, who at the time was supposed to be the best player in the world. Then Hunter arguably was playing like some of the best Counter-Strike in the whole tournament in the final. So it's like, dude, literally, just go look right now. Whatever his rating was, I don't know, 1.13 or so. That's enough. That is enough with the AWP to make G2 for real. They could be the number 1 team with this Alexi B. I think people are really underrating the potential of this squad. Like, for me, I'm very interested to see. Like, this could be the team that overtakes Na'Vi, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And as well, like, even watching Monacy, I think he has huge potential. Like, there's some times where I've seen that he makes like these small individual mistakes that kind of cost him the kill, or he ends up dying, or maybe it shifts the round in a way that doesn't actually favor G2, right? If he can iron those things out, like, considering the fact like he's only like 16 or something like that, right? If he gets another 6 months and he irons that out that part of his play, they're going to be a really, really strong team. And, I think what it will come down to longer term is more so, can Alexi B and Extaz get these guys the highest potential that they can possibly reach, right? Because we know it's there. It's just, can they harness it? That's the real question.
And I'll also say as well, there better be nobody who's criticising Monacy as an AWPer in G2 if you're a G2 fan. Because you all spent the last year and a half gaslighting me that Amanek, has got to be like, 27 years old now or something, like years and years in the game. They kept saying that line that used to trigger me, like, but if he just got 10% better with the AWP, it's like, first of all, do you know how enormous 10% is, boys? Just say 1. 1 would be enough, by the way. 10% is such an enormous... That's where none of these people invest in the stock market. And they don't know anything about percentages, dude. But like, if they're willing to hold out hope that Amanek would like improve into like a world-class AWPer, spoiler, like, he was doing a fine job. It's just his problem was his team was too good, and then it made him not look as good because he's not. Guess what? Every team that was playing him for the championship was like ZywOo, fucking simple. It's like, that's just unfair. Like, Amanek shouldn't be in that position. So same. If we're going to give Amanek 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, like, Monacy can have fucking a nice period of time, at least a year for fuck's sake. Because especially as, like, I thought he looked great in the first outing anyway, considering they had all the scenario with the coach. And that's like essentially his first real LAN, if you think about it. Like, he's not a person with history. So everything's pointing up for G2. I think it looks mega. I'm just waiting for that whole thing to happen. One thing I thought was funny, though, this is one of the rare times ever in human history this has happened. So just get ready. This is a momentous occasion, Mahone. I actually went on hltv.org forums, not just to laugh at people and think, wow, it's great to be sort of like superior and, you know there's like an underclass of people who barely even human, are they? Just a bunch of idiots just typing stuff. I actually found, you're not going to believe this, an interesting suggestion. It wasn't stupid, believe it or not. True, it might be one of those, a broken clock is right twice a day or whatever, but this is actually an interesting conversation starter I didn't think of. So obviously, because unfortunately the whole conflict in Ukraine and the sanctions against the Russian teams, there's a real world scenario where some of those players probably won't be in those organisations soon because it looks like they won't be able to compete in the West, or they might have to leave, Russia and get as you saw with Monty, you might have to get like a Serbian nationality. Who knows what's going to happen, right? So in this scenario, one thing I don't think people are thinking about, they know with Gambit, for example, apparently you can buy the whole roster, right? But some of the other teams, they also might end up just selling piece by piece. That might happen if someone's going to buy the whole squad. So I was thinking about this, dude. I tweeted it just before we did the show. Dude, I think the most obvious pickup, HLTV Forums has actually nailed it. Dude, it's YEKINDAR. Because not only does he speak fluent English, has a really good work, everyone knows all the upsides, because he's a hard entry player. Mate, not only is that like the weak position in almost every top team, but he wouldn't even, it's not like he's the entry that takes all your resources. Like, I actually think, no joke, this is why I say they've got it right, but like a broken clock, dude. Because what they're trying to do is what they always do, which is you just stack more stars on top of each other. But I actually think they've accidentally backed into this, dude. This would work roll overlap for nearly all the top teams, as far as I can tell. Like, I think you could actually put him on like G2 instead of Jax. You could put him instead of Rain on fucking Faze. You could put him instead of Masuta on Vitality. If you do any of these moves, assuming it works, obviously, and he plays anywhere, doesn't that team immediately just become like a potential number one? Like, I think this move could work. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think the same thing. Like, if you could get YEKINDAR on any of these top teams, it'd probably be an upgrade. One thing that I will caution, though, I'm not exactly sure how much YEKINDAR has actually had experience when it comes to playing international lineups and like speaking English, right? Because even for me, when Device was first joining NiP, when he had to start speaking Swedish, he was actually telling me that he was struggling with that transition a little bit more than he thought he would have.
Oh, okay.
And that's actually something that you wouldn't have expected because of his situation at the time. He was actually quite fluent at Swedish, but being able to just kind of still struggle with that was actually, kind of interesting, right? So, I do think, though, that due to the nature of what YEKINDAR does, like as the entry, it probably doesn't matter as much on T side, right? But it is something to consider. But overall, I think it would be a great move for any team that's able to actually pick him up. So yeah, I agree.
What do you think about his game, by the way? Because I almost feel like, I've even told him this in person. I told him in real life, dude. I won't say the setting, but I just told him. I don't know if you're actually aware, but like your team's actually low-key fucking you, dude, because they're making you play a hard entry, and like that doesn't even exist in CSGO anymore. I said we even made fuckers like Apex stop doing that like 3 or 4 years ago because it was just unfair that one person always goes in first, because it's going to just tank your stats, obviously, and it's going to make it so hard, So like in the modern day, if people don't know, it depends on the tactic usually as to who goes in and who's on what part of the map. It's more like, it's more who's closest to the spot. So when I see his style of play, like, it's cool because it's kind of a throwback. But what do you think of this style? Like, I'm just impressed he manages to make it work, dude. I think it's insane.
Yeah, I think it's insane as well that he's able to get as much space as he does. I think he said in an interview that he's more of like a space creator, which I actually agree with him on that point.
Okay.
He's much more of a space creator where he's willing to, he's the kind of person on Mirage T side where he's the guy who goes out mid immediately. He goes down the bottom slope, tries to get connected right away, right? And he's able to just afford a lot of time for VP. And I think that's actually what makes VP so difficult to play against at the same time, right? In some ways, yeah, they play slow and then they kind of, screw him over in some way, maybe.
Course, yeah.
But I think, at least from my point of view, whenever we in NiP last year, whenever we played against VP, we always lost them. There's just something about them that's so difficult to play against. And I think part of it is that YEKINDAR, he's so in your face on T side. He gets the space right away. And then in some way you want to like re-aggress some other part of the map, but then James waiting for you with an off.
He's got the off angle, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
he's
exactly,
walking to it.
So that's where it becomes really difficult. So in some way, I actually think that because of YEKINDAR's ability to be able to do that, it's actually made VP quite successful on the T sides, being able to do that. So in some way, I have to think about like if these other teams actually incorporate YEKINDAR, like how do they actually use them? Because I don't think it's as simple as just you send them in first on the site, because there's more nuance to that, right? It depends on how much space can he actually get for you and what do you actually decide to do with that space. Because even if you are able to get that space, that doesn't mean you're necessarily always going to convert the round.
Sure. If I had to pick, by the way, of all those top teams that you could have him in, I think I actually low-key probably would take the G2 example. I'd put him instead of Jax because, mate, I can't. Can you even imagine a world where like fucking YEKINDAR creates space for Niko to just walk onto a site and then he just knows? But like that's just you're just going to win so many rounds off that. It's going to be that would be OP as fuck in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, because I think as well, it's like if you have those people like in that kind of team, at least if it was G2, because normally what ends up happening in those kind of, or for G2 at least, is that Niko, he's normally on one extremity and then Hunter's on the other extremity, right? If you have YEKINDAR who's able to take space middle or wherever the main part of the map is, and then every time the CTs try to re-aggress one of the extremities, you have to run into Hunter or Niko, right? Those aren't going to be easy. They might result in a trade, but it's going to open up the map so much more for them to actually work with. So yeah, I would say it's actually a very solid pickup if they could manage to pull that off.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, at the moment, I mean, it's just started now. If people don't know, today's the day that Pro League began in the Group B, which is the one that has Faze Clan and those other squads in, right? I want to actually ask a bit about Vitality, because the problem is, it doesn't feel like that's of all the new rosters. That's the one that still feels like the most, we don't really know anything about them, right? They had like the all right showing in the Blast one. They looked all right. It was fine. You know, they were close with everyone. It was the one where everyone only played Inferno, if everyone remembers that stupid ass group. But then after that, though, it kind of eats it. It was actually just a bit lackluster if you look at their placing. Sure, they lost the bombs, but still, you expected them to be deeper. So they're obviously the team where it's like we're sort of waiting for them to arrive. Like, are they actually, you know, like a potential number one? Could they be a team that wins the major? And thus far, here's what's crazy for me at the moment is if you look, I always say this about any of the teams that have like what I call the aliens, right? Which is Simple, ZywOo and fucking Niko. The reason why I call them the aliens is because not only do they seem to usually play the same level, no matter who's in the team, but they seem to play the same level even if like their team plays bad or good, which is like, that's so unusual for a CS player. So what I normally say is this. Sure, if you have like Simple, for example, when you're making a roster move, you just take it for granted. Like, well, Simple's going to do simple things, then we're going to add this guy. The problem is this though, and I always throw it out there, it's like, we're actually putting a very unrealistic expectation even on the aliens though. And so the problem I said when they made this Vitality squad is we're all assuming, right, okay, well ZywOo's amazing, so he'll just keep doing that, and then you add, you know, Magus, and so far actually people haven't noticed ZywOo's had like some dodgy games so far in this lineup, and it's looking like essentially there's a problem. And I wonder, because at the moment I wonder if Niko's going through this in G2, when you're on a team where it is really limited and essentially even your teammates know like it's the ZywOo show or it's the Niko show, you have the green light to do anything you want at that point in time, and you can do everything that's good for you individually, because in this case you need to be at your best to win the game for the team, right? When you add in all these other pieces, I mean, first of all, if you're bringing in like major winners, you might accommodate them, you might give him a spot, you might give him some space. There's a million things that could change in a team dynamic. So what are your expectations for this squad overall? What have you thought thus far?
Yeah, I think as well, I think they just need more time, right? I think the English language thing is actually going to be a big deal for them,
sure,
right? Because you have two teams where their cores, they didn't speak English beforehand, right? So I think that's going to be a big deal. In terms of ZywOo's performance, right? I think we can still let it slide just a little bit, even though he has had a couple of dodgy games. I do think that there's maybe some slight differences in like maybe some of the positions that he plays, right? It is slightly different. Like for example, on Inferno, like Inferno T side, he normally plays like as the banana guy, right? But now Magus has taken his spot, right? So I'm sure he has to kind of evaluate where he can find impact in like a slightly different way, right? Because I'm sure before, maybe part of it was just, you know, Vitality would try to set himself up to, you know, get as much success wherever he could, right? But now that he has this Astralis core where he kind of has to like tend to them a little bit more, I don't know if that's actually the case or how much that is actually true, but I think they just probably need a bit more time in just every front, I would say.
Yeah. I'd also say as well, the other factor people don't ever stop and think about is, it's like everyone keep forgetting coaches exist nowadays, do. I know they were all fucking cheaters 2 years ago, so we all hate them, but low-key, like, they do exist. Like, remember, everyone in Astralis never mentions there's no fucking Zonic there anymore. Like, I notice that narrative never comes up. So similarly on Vitality, this is another thing you can't take for granted, is remember Zonic had Device his whole time in Astralis, and Device and ZywOo aren't similar at all as AWP. Like, there's such because I always say the thing about ZywOo is some of the kills he goes for with the AWP aren't even AWP kills. He's just so good. He just goes for no scopes and shit, doesn't he? Like, Device is your typical paint by numbers AWP that you expect from the old days, you know. So it also people underestimate. you think like for example, if I thought, well, what would I do if I coach Vitality? I mean, the first thing I'd do actually is I'd have to find out from within the team who these players are. Like, I think I know from, demos or interviews, and I have my own conception. But for all you know, sometimes you get in a team and you find out like something that a guy does really well, he doesn't even like doing it, and he's only doing because someone's telling him to, or he does it because someone else can't do it in the team. So there's all sorts of like dynamics behind the scenes I think fans don't understand. So if you bring in a coach like Zonic, assuming he's going to build up a big structure like he did in Astralis, that ain't going to come overnight, guys. The difference is the teams like FaZe Clan, they are already made with the players they have and the style that IGL are carrying is. They are already made to be going tomorrow. A team like Vitality, this could I actually think the timing for the moves was good because it gives them still a few months before the major. They just have to basically get through the qualifier, and the major's when they have to be good for my money. I don't mind before that. I'll give them a break because it is such a new, as you said, even just the language part's pretty drastic. Everyone's speaking a different language.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd say as well, right? Like, I wouldn't be surprised to see if maybe they try slightly more drastic changes in terms of like their positions, right? Like, not every team is willing to do it, but who knows? Maybe they can actually get somebody more. They can get more out of somebody if they actually swap like a position or two. Because I remember like the old Vitality, like back when they ran the 6-man roster, right? They were moving ZywOo on Inferno from A to B to back to A, like that kind of stuff, right? I wouldn't be surprised to see if they maybe try that in some way. Because right now, currently, they just went for the cookie cutter approach where it's worked out the best way possible, where you have the Astralis people, they just play all the spots that they used to last time, and then all the Vitality people play the same spots they did last time as well, right? But what if they actually mesh them just a little bit just to see what would happen, right? I don't know. We'll see if that ends up being a solution, but I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happens, because a lot of teams actually do stuff like that where they get a guy to just move a position here just to see what happens, and if it works, they do it. If not, they just go back.
All right, let's do this then. You tell me a team that you would be interested. Who's interesting to you at the moment in CS? Who are you thinking about? Who are you watching?
I think right now the team that I'm interested in would probably be Ents, actually, because of their results so far, right?
Sure.
Because I was just watching the way that they were playing recently, and it feels like something that I noticed on their T side, right? And this might be really basic to a lot of pro teams, but something that I think they've done really well, which might be the reason for their consistency on the T sides, is that they have Diha and Spinx. They're always the extremity people. So for example, on Overpass, Spinx or Diha, they might be one of the B guys and the other guy might be the connector guy. And what they have is that the other three, Hades, what's his name?
Snappy.
Hades, Snappy, and Madden. They're like the core three. Yes. Yeah, they're like the core three that basically decide where the round's gonna go, right? And with Spinx and Diha, all they do is simply just control parts of the map. And with these three people, they just they go long A or they go up mid, and then depending on how things kind of pan out, they make the call. And I think it's actually structured very well because you have Madden who can actually entry a little bit more. You have Snappy in that core as well, where he can get the exact information so you can call properly, and you have Hades as the opper. And then you just group with one of these two players. So I would say that Ents is actually looking pretty interesting right now just based on the way they play.
Yeah, I think also the other thing with that team for me that I think is always underrated is these aren't the biggest names, of course, like a lot of fans, these aren't household names. But if you've actually watched these individual players play, Ents is like mad slept on for the skill level of this team, dude. Like, these are some pretty, basically, aside from Snappy, everyone in this team has been a star in some team previously in their squad, or this team. Like, so I think the firepower, the key thing is, obviously, they're not as tenured playing on LAN or playing together. They're all different nationalities. So, true, Snappy's kind of got a job to do, but I think he's got a real chance to sort of like rebuild his reputation in this team, because these upsets they're getting now, I mean, you know this from the fucking RMR last year, dude. Like, I think for real, they were a team that maybe like the nerves with their last lineup affected them at the major and stuff. Like, you could see like they weren't as good on LAN as they were when it was like the RMR or the online games. Like, there's clear potential in this team. This is a nice dark horse team for me.
Yeah, exactly. I think they have a lot of things that are working well for them. It just comes down to how well can they improve on this, and then how far can they go, basically. That's why I'm interested in them.
What do you actually think of, because obviously the recent player they added was the player Madden, who people know best for the time when he was in the FPX / it was Godsent before that, if you remember, where like he was kind of like the breakout player in that team, although to be fair, the Zen guy was pretty good as well. It's just everyone knew his name, so they forget about him. Just the way narratives work of, fans. So Madden was obviously the breakout guy, and then plus there is that meme stupid thing where like Devil Walk was like telling him like, fucking stop, And then everyone's going, wow, that's such abusive behavior. It's like, you've never seen what it's like trying to argue with CSGO pros, boys. Like, that was pretty tame. That was pretty tame compared to some of the ones you'd see in the dressing room if there was like a camera in there. I'm telling you right now, especially after someone gets rocked like 14-1 on CT side or something, you know. So what have you actually thought of that addition though? Because as you say, like he's obviously playing a bit of entry now. I was wondering how they were going to fit that in because that was the one thing I worried about actually, dude. It reminds me a little bit of the NA complexity team because again, it's like, dude, the skill is mad underrated on this team. Like everyone's a star player, but the downside is when everyone is a star player, no one's a star player, right? You got to figure out where the team goes, what the structure is, and actually that can be tricky, you know, figuring out essentially who are my, like, the horses leading the carriage, as it were, and who's kind of a follower, who's helping them. So what have you thought of that addition, bringing in another big name?
Yeah, I think though that the difference is that I don't think Snappy's really approaching the team in that way because I feel like he has so many pieces that can work well, right? Where it is just based on it's the core three of him, Madden, and Hades. They're always the ones that are getting map control, right? And they're going to do their jobs, and they're no slouches, right? And at the same time, you got Spinks and you have D-Hal on the other ends of the maps. So that makes it very, it's like it's hard to actually aggress those areas of the map. So I think that just being able to bring in that player like Madden kind of helps like release the core, if that makes sense, right? Because I don't really see anybody who's like necessarily the weak link here, right?
No, absolutely not. I mean, if people don't know, actually, and I'll give him credit because he always used to say it, but I used to slightly joke at him, but it's actually true. Snappy's also not a bad fragger for an IGL if you've never seen it. He'll always sort of like get a little bit extra out of each situation that you'd expect, you know. So I'll give him credit. I think generally the skill's good in this team. And all I'll say is if a fan hasn't watched much of this team, listen, I don't know when it'll be. It'll probably be later this year because you need time to bed in and all that stuff. But like that Spinks guy, one day, he's going to be on those like top 20 fucking HLTV. Like you can just see it with the eye test. His aim's fucking mental in it.
Yeah, definitely. He looks like somebody who has a lot of potential. I think maybe just another year or so, and he could be a top 20 player. I would not be surprised at all.
Absolutely. Well, who else then? Give me another team. Who else is interested at the moment?
Ooh, I was gonna say I was actually interested in Vitality just because of the problem that they were facing earlier. So I mean, I guess we already talked about them. In terms of another team, I think this is a little bit hard to say. I have to say, like, coming into this year, I actually was interested in Godsent, right? But they kind of flopped a little bit like recently, so my interest is not as high, I guess I would say. But I was very interested in terms of like what Taco was getting out of those guys, right? Because that was like a very new project, and even the approach they had where they didn't really have a real opera, like it would be a different opera on different maps, like that was something I've never seen any other team do. So yeah, I think that's kind of what more interests me more, to see like how some of these teams get over some of the struggles they have.
I've got a question for you. One team that people only talked about at the beginning of the roster move was obviously OG, because the whole narrative was like Nexa going there, and then obviously they had that little spike at the Blast tournament where they like overperformed a little bit, right? The problem I have with this squad is all the players are all right. Like, there's no one I look at the team, like, get him out the team, he's not good enough. Like, they're all players who can play at tier 1. But I'm not convinced personally by like this specific lineup. Like, what do you actually think of this squad? Like, I'll give you an example. One thing that immediately, if you even just look at the lineup, I feel is a concern, is like, as much as people don't want it to be like, they don't want CS to sound simplistic, like, it's not like people really sit around like, well, I'm the star player, and it's like, you kind of know who the star player is by how they play, by the way. That just sorts itself out. But that's the problem I think I see in this team, dude, is like, if I compare them to any other team who's going to be a top 10 team, it's like their best player ain't going to match up. Like, they don't have anyone on comp. They don't have any Niko fucking divide. They don't have anyone on this level as far as I can tell. Like, maybe One Day Flames could be it. He's kind of in that Spinks category, not just because they're Israeli. They're both actually similar sorts of players. They're really young in their careers. They both have mad aim, and they seem like they're sort of, these are the teams they're going to learn their skills in. But like, aside from that, listen, it's like I say, it's like maybe the floor level of the team's good, but it just misses some charm for me. I don't really know what I'm supposed to get hyped about with OG,
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. I kind of feel like OG might be in that spot that NiP that we were in last year, where it's kind of like, yeah, we have like good pieces, but we didn't have like a real star until Device came, right? I think that's something that kind of lacks with this team. And I think the overperformance at Blast for them was a little bit overstated, I have to say, because there are a bunch of BO1s, and also they played Ancient, which they were actually quite good at Ancient. I'll give them that, right? But that's a small part of being like a top 10 team, right?
Yes.
So I think they have the good pieces moving forward, but it's going to be hard to see like how they're actually going to go up without getting like you say, maybe a firepower upgrade or maybe some different type of approach in the way that they play, like something that can unlock these players in some way.
Obviously, you can choose how harshly you critique it or how much praise you give. What did you actually think of Nexa when he was the IGL of G2? Do you think he did a good job as an IGL?
I think for him, like a lot of the time, whenever we played against G2, it kind of seemed like they had like a lot of strats and stuff like that, right? And I think that's not a bad way to play CS, where you basically have a bunch of strats where it's like there's actually so many where you can't keep track of all of them. You can't be like, oh, you got to watch out for that one, you got to watch out for that one, watch out for that one. That was something that I think they did, right? But I think in terms of just being flexible and stuff like that, I think what he might have needed to do more with that G2 team was to try to unlock the players a little bit more in some way, right? Because these kind of strategies can only get you so far. In some ways, running it in that way kind of limits you to the power of that strategy, right? Because some strategies, like it doesn't matter. Like if they're really good strategies, it's like you can have the worst players run them and it'll work. But if you have really bad strategies, even if you have the best players, it'll still work because your firepower is so good, right? So I think for him, some of the things that he needed to do were to just try to find that balance a little bit better between running more set strategies and just unlocking his players more, right? And I wouldn't be surprised right now if like on OG, if he's kind of thinking more in that way, where it's like, how do I get more out of these guys, right? Because when I watched some of their demos before, especially during the Blast one, they were running some of the same strats that the old OG team had, like with Alexi B, but with some slight tweaks, right? So it's not like they're using the entire playbook, but there were a couple rounds here and there they're using those strats and just slight tweaks. And yeah, I'd like to see if Nexa can try to work on that aspect of getting more of his players, because I think OG are going to need it.
Because that would obviously, as much as people, I agree, they get. Partly it's because he's a very. Here's the thing: Nexa is a cool guy, by the way. Like I met him in real life. He is exactly as he appears on Twitter. He's a very amiable guy, as we'd say in English. Like everyone would you just like him by default. He's just a cool guy. I think because of that story, that obviously people felt sorry that he was kicked out of G2. I think they just wanted it to be like, but he's landed on his feet. Look, OG's even better thanks to him. Well, he's way better than Lexi B. It's like, but some of the hot takes on that fucking Blast tournament were wild. Because as you say, it was a bunch of online best of ones. Like why are people losing their mind? And probably the most forgiving format in the history of the universe, where like if people don't know, it's like Na'Vi was allowed to lose like 3 times as much mental and they still qualified. Like, what is this tournament structure? So it was mad anyway. But one thing I'll say about that is like, that is the area I'm looking at in OG is one, as you say, like if he can get more out of the other players, that's usually a surefire sign, by the way, and IGL's doing a really good job, because players don't all just develop on their own for no reason. Like, as we said, players tend to just do what works for them and what they can. They get stuck in little patterns, So if an IGL can really level up a bunch of players, that's one thing. And then secondly, fair play. If you're saying he was doing good strats, one thing I've always given him credit for is, I tell you what, as an actual IGL, he's a fucking good fragger, obviously, because obviously he's played without being an IGL in his career. So if he can both actually call a good game, then actually he's fairly OP in terms of his firepower. He could really add something to the squad that not many other teams have,
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, like, some people kind of understage his individual ability back when he was on OG in some way, right? I always felt like he
like G2
was solid. Yeah. Oh no, sorry, yeah. G2. Yeah, he was always generally solid in my opinion whenever he was playing on that roster, right? It was just obviously overshadowed by Niko, Hunter, that kind of thing, right? And he's not like he necessarily got all the best spots either, right? He'd be the kind of guy on ramp on Nuke, and then he'd be the A player on Mirage, like that kind of stuff, where he's not really in the middle of the action. Where maybe if he was in the middle of the action, maybe he would put up more statistically. Who knows?
Yeah, the reason I thought last year it was so hard to actually analyse G2 is because, I mean, look where they were in the world. They were literally like the number 3 team for most of the year. And then when we came to LAN, at times they were number 2 or number 3. So it's like, when you're that good, like realistically, I'm not really criticising anyone. It's just that people, in theory, there could be a better player that could make you number 1. That's really the angle you're looking at from. Because the other angle I thought with G2 last year, which actually did make it so that like people probably did focus too much on like Niko should carry the game. Because like they had both Amanek and Jax at the same time. It's like, dude, pick one. You can have one of them, of course, that you can make. They both can play their own role. We've seen them, they're like specialists. The problem is if you have both of them, you're just going to have those games every now and then where they both frag really badly. And then it's like, now Niko does have to be like 2 people in the server to do it, as everyone knows from the old Na'Vi teams, well, back when it was the bad old days when they had fucking Flamey and Zeus and those, 2 people can't frag. someone's got to make up for that, unfortunately. So I actually think all things considered, they got the absolute maximum out of that team last year, G2. Like if you knew those were the only pieces you had to work with, you couldn't make roster moves, I don't think you could get better results than that. They did fantastically in context, you know.
Yeah, they tried everything, right? Like even Niko was opping, right? Amnak didn't always op either, right? Like maybe the only other changes I can think of is maybe Jack that's opping or something like that. I don't know, right? Something ridiculous like that. But I do think, they tried almost everything they could with the pieces they had. So yeah, and I think they did fairly well, right? Obviously, there were some ups and downs, obviously, with the Pro League result where they went 0-5 or whatever it was. Yeah. But overall, I think they did fantastic with what they had.
I'll also say as well, just because another thing that you can look at from an IGL, I'll tell you what, bearing in mind, look, I did play a decent part in building this rep, but obviously Niko as a rep is a difficult player. I don't know if you're aware of that. But, so, I mean, we have, the joke we literally say on By the Numbers is he's the God Emperor Niko, because the principle is, it's not really like that, by the way. Like, that was years ago when he was in Faze Clan. But, like, it's true, though, if you have Niko in your team, so much scrutiny's on how is he playing, what's he doing. Well, if people don't know, I don't think a lot of newer fans get this dude. It's why I kept saying to people, like, I wasn't someone personally who had Niko as the number one player in the world, but I think it's a legit, like, it's an opinion, it's valid, you can make the argument. But the area people were missing with the argument was, what he had to stress was how much fucking entry work this guy was doing. Like, dude, the old Niko's the god lurker. Like, that's what he's one of the best players ever at. So, to me, I actually think that was quite impressive that they sort of, like, either he himself adjusted his role or they adjusted him in the team. And if anything, he was getting more impact out of his game. Like, that's why if you want to talk purely as a rifler, he was OP as fuck, of course. He was putting insane numbers and entry in. Like, the guy was, lots of teams would like to have a player like that, I tell you right now.
Yeah, Niko was able to just, like, in a lot of spots, like especially T-Nuke and stuff like that, where he has the freedom to kind of work the map. He was going for a lot more of those, like, towards the tail end of 2021. And I think it's just part of it was he had a lot of confidence to just know, I'm probably going to beat this guy if I just take a duel against him, right? For sure. And that confidence goes a long way. But at the same time, confidence without actual skill, it means nothing. You're just going to die every time. But yes. Niko was capitalized on all the timings, all the right positionings as well. Like even just if you watch the way he kind of clears angles and stuff like that, right? I think there's only maybe one other person that's just like him, where it's kind of like Rops, where the way they clear angles, the way they clear sights, it's like they're almost never caught off guard, right? And that's actually an understated ability that nobody that isn't really, talked about very much, where it's like that mechanical ability it's not easy to always ingrain. Like even though pro players know about it, it's not something that they consciously always think of. But for these guys, Niko, Rops, they always are very conscious of the way they hold angles, the way they peek, all that stuff.
Yeah, I'd even say as well, an underrated aspect is if you're the opponent playing against Niko and you're on CT side, because he is probably the best ever with a rifle at clearing angles. Like, I don't think people realise you almost have to play against him like you do against an AWPer. Like, if you play against some AWPer like Simple, if you just do a peek for some stupid reason, he'll just kill you instantly, right? So you're always like, there's always like a threat level in your mind, like he could be here, he could be there. And it changes how you play the spot. Like, it's the same thing with Niko for me. It's like, if you know Niko can be in those particular spots, you aren't just like peeking it for no reason with a knife in your hand or a grenade out, because you just every now and then you're just going to get your head clipped. And I even saw that dude in the major final, because for me the underrated guy in the major final was low-key Electronic, because it's like Electronic on that Nuke game really was just like, I'll take care of Niko, and he was just he was winning that duel so many times outside, it was mad. Whereas the difference is, as you say, Niko has that duel against anyone else, he just wins it. Like it's as you say, it's more like that was his office and they were like, right, go to work, you just find the pick, once you found the pick, then we'll hit the site. And it's like he would just do it every time otherwise. So I thought that was like one of those examples of a performance where it's like, you didn't top the scoreboard, but what you actually did in the server was like the game-winning element. You neutralized the opposing team's best player. That's so underrated.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there were honestly, even back at NiP, there were game plans that we had designed around trying to shut down their best player, right? I think in one of the NiP vlogs, I think they showed it where it was like, okay, the game plan is we kill ZywOo at Banana, right? And not be scared of him, because if we give him too much space, they're going to run with it, right? So it very much is like an actual game plan. So, I'm not too surprised that Navi ran that kind of thing against Niko.
Sure. The only problem is this, right? Like when I'm on the desk and I'm doing my whole persona, where I'm always right, I have all these great lines that are sort of like my principles of the game. So one of them I have, because it sounds fire, is I always say, like, I always say, like, basically, it doesn't matter how good your aim is. If you're flashbanged, then you're blind. So, you know, your aim is irrelevant. So that sounds great as like something you'd say in a speech before the team plays, you know, to make them believe, yeah, we could win if we do that. The problem is, if anyone's ever seen one of those snipe to die reverse POV compilations, now you know why it's not as easy just as that, though. Because what happens is you run up that banana and the guy just caps you in the head instantly. You're like, well, shit, I didn't even see him, so, like, fuck. Like, I don't think fans will never really get that angle, you know. Like, it's like, as much as we're enjoying, like, how amazing the players they make are, it actually to be in those matches, like, the real things the players are thinking about, they're in a totally different headspace than all of us observing. It's why I always think the most overrated aspect is, you know, when fans pick apart in, like, a 1v1, like, oh, this guy, like, did a misstep here, or, like, why didn't he throw the gun back? It's like, because you're thinking in a really rational way where you have, like, forever to figure out the right answer. He's in the moment, like, think of all the pressure, the thing. He's trying to even think also, here's an angle if fans don't know, he's trying to think things like, you know, was this guy in a 1v1 earlier and did he go fast then? Did he fake plant? Did he tap? What does he normally do when I see him in FP? They're trying to think through all the fucking Rolodex and figure. So, like, it's all well and good saying, like, he should have done this. Like, it's like, you'd do it wrong if you were in the game, guy. I'd do it wrong. We'd all do it a million times worse than these players. Like, you have to give them a little bit of fucking slack. Because as you say, even in scrims, you can do things perfectly. You go in the official and suddenly, like, the bizarre thing is, sometimes you don't even know why it didn't work. It's like, well, I thought, what the hell? We commed everything. We went there correctly. Why did this timing break? But it just does when there's extra factors in play, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what really separates, you know, people who, let's just say, are coaches or analysts and stuff like that, is that players are actually able to make those correct decisions in the moment, right? That is so hard. And to not just make the correct decision, but to execute it properly too, right? It's one thing to just be like, okay, the right play is for me to move in this way and path in this direction, but it's another to actually be able to do that and then actually be able to hit the shot too, right?
Sure.
All those things in combination, they're not easy, right? So yeah, in a lot of ways, it's like, if you have like 10 seconds to think about it, of course you can, almost anybody who plays CS at a reasonably high level can figure out what the right answer is. But then being able to do it in that moment, that's only something for like the top, you know, I would say 10% of pros even, I would say, to be at that tier.
Yes. I mean, the best example I always give, by the way, is if you're an analyst, it looks like every pro player's an idiot when they die in that, like, off angle that Jame always holds on that one spot, you know. But what you don't know is this, is like, he conditions you. He doesn't just do that one time, like, for no reason. Like, the idea is, like, the other two times you didn't peek, like, the apartments on Mirage, you realise he wasn't there, so you're like, fuck, next time I better, like, push up and take that space, and then that's the time you walk on the corner, he just gets a free kill, and you're like, fuck, why'd I do that? That's a perfect example of what a fan thinks is obvious, but a pro player is really hard to do. And by the way, I'll even say this, as much as I despise it as a style of play, because I just hate watching it, that's a really hard style to make work. Like, a lot of people don't realise, like, he is baiting, but he's really good at baiting. I'll give him that. Like, he knows how to fucking make it work for him. Like, plenty of people could bait and then you wouldn't get the kill, you wouldn't get the trade, you'd just lose the round and you'd look like an idiot. So I think that there's, as usual, there's always so much nuance in what players are doing and how they're thinking, you know.
Yeah, definitely. And when it comes to Jame as well, right? Like, I have to admit, like, he's actually quite good at baiting, if that makes sense.
He's mega,
right? Like,
yeah.
It's not easy. Like, people say that, oh yeah, he's baiting and stuff like that. But honestly, to bait properly is not that easy. Especially like when you get to the top tier of play, when teams know how to bail out the player that just got a kill. So even if you do have your front player go in, he gets the information. Actually being able to trade on that guy can be harder than you think, because the other team, they have people who are supporting him with flashes, Molotovs, smokes, things like that, right? So
yes,
it's underrated, honestly. A lot of people give a bad name to it, just probably because, you know, when they play in Pugs, or
they're thinking of their matchmaking game. Exactly, perfect. Yes.
But then when it comes to like high tier play, right, being able to do it well is not that easy.
Yes. No, you're totally right. That is, I always thought the same thing. They're just thinking of someone when someone did bait the fuck out of them. Like, you know, the guy who just stands next to you on Dust 2 to pick up the AWP when you die from the fucking crack. And you're like, oh, I've hit this guy. That's not what Jame's doing, guys. And we're not talking about that sort of baiting. Like, actually, I thought you made a very shrewd point there, which is there's another area in pro play that might seem like a blind spot, actually, for a fan. They won't understand what's going on. Sometimes when the first guy actually dies when you're going on T-side, right, the pleb fan will just be like, why are they going so slow, like Russian trade? Yeah, but the other team knows you're coming for the trade because that is the fundamental mechanism of pro Counter-Strike. So as Mahone's saying, it's way trickier than you think. Like, your timing has to be so on. You have to also, by the way, know how they respond to when they, like, get the first... Like, there's so much extra than just going in. Because if you just rush around that corner... Like you say, you'll just hear that like dink of like 2 grenades coming off a wall. A guy will already be pre-firing spray, and you're like, that's a great way to just lose 2 kills and then be down 3v5.
Exactly. It's tricky, right? So yeah, I'd say that's, even a thing on both T side and CT side. On CT side, it's more of, okay, if you get the kill, how do you bail out somebody? On T side, it's, if you can get the kill, how do we bail this guy out so that we maintain the advantage? Or it could even be, if we get the kill, at what point do we actually just push into the site and just domino, right? And just screw the whole map control idea. So it's very tricky. It's very nuanced. And that's why, that's why it's actually so valuable for callers to actually be with the pack, right? If it's possible.
Yes.
Because they can see those timings. They can see what's about to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the areas. Funny enough, I was talking about this on a Valorant podcast that I'm doing with someone now, and I'm not a person who knows the game Valorant, so I'm sort of like learning the game and the meta as I talk on these talk shows, right? And one of the crazy things is in that game, apparently they're still almost going with the old school approach in CS, where like a lot of the people who are the leaders are the people who are like playing back, and it's like you want to see how the game develops. Because if people don't know, in the modern day, even though it's not perfect and ideal, like you can see why, by the way, we were getting coaches to be IGLs once upon a time when you could do it, but like in the modern day, I think the whole reason, this is a really misunderstood point. So many of the IGL's entry now, Carrigan, Glaive, you can go through the whole fucking list, Alexi B, sometimes, loads of them entry. What I think fans don't realise is, I don't think that actually is ideal for an IGL. It's just that essentially, you have one less person to worry about doing his job. You're there. You are him. You're one of the entry guys. And as you say, instead of like having a listen to comms, you're just seeing the guy next to you. You're seeing the person ahead. You're seeing what utils use. Yeah, it's a lot easier to be in the moment, I feel like, doing that. Because like that's why I asked that question if people don't know at the beginning about Hampus. Like, I think it's pretty unusual to sometimes be like a lurk player, sometimes not even with any vision of your team, and you're having to just hope in your brain you can visualize what they're doing and how their timing's going to work. Because the hardest thing ever is a lot of secondary callers, people might know, are lurkers, but that's just to sync up when they do the lurk, like when they do a backstab, when you go on the site, when they hold a position and kill the rotation site. They're not calming like the whole game. They're just doing their shit, basically. So again, another area I think is a lot trickier than might seem.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's actually an interesting point you brought up about a lot of IGLs kind of being like this entry kind of person, right? And I think it is a lot of it due to, because you get that direct information. But I think one thing that these IGLs need to think about, and not to call anybody out specifically,
yeah, sure.
I think they need to kind of focus a little bit more on like actually killing people sometimes when they're in these spots, right? Because sometimes I feel like they kind of get ahead of themselves where it's like, okay, I have to take this timing because if I don't take it, my team's not going to be in this spot to do X, Y, and Z or whatever, right? But I think if they're able to just kind of worry about their mechanics a little bit more to actually make sure they get the kill, that will always be a more advantageous position than simply dying and then controlling the team from the back. Because I do think that's like, that's part of the reason why you see that sometimes when Kerrigan, when he has really good games on T side, they're
unbeatable.
Right?
Yeah,
they're unbeatable, absolutely. Basically, right? Yeah. But then when he dies and he doesn't have these entries or stuff like that, then that's when things start to kind of collapse. So that's why I think for a lot of these IGLs, maybe that's something to kind of think about.
No, I agree. That's one of those areas where you sometimes worry if people like buy the narrative themselves and it goes in their brain and becomes a feedback loop. Because when we say that you're like a low fragging IGL, we just mean it's like a tendency. We don't mean you're not allowed to frag. Like, of course, because I agree. Sometimes those IGLs, like you say, they're too worried about like the map movements basically. So they think in their brain it's like, well, I'm just creating space for like some fucking sick player like Twists coming behind. He'll headshot everyone. It's like, actually, dude, as you say, like even one kill going into a site from someone like Carrigan, assuming he's done a good call, that probably is round one. Like, think about it, if he's still alive, and then him and the entry are going on to the next person to trade. Like, that's the bomb site. You're in the site at that point in time. You've done your job. So I do think that's a little bit underrated because basically it's a bit like it's like if I told Dominic he's not like a really good AWPer, it doesn't mean he should only go for the most safe conservative AWP shots. There's still going to be times you got to go for a duel, and take it and win the fight. Like, it's just part of the game. So yeah, it's definitely too easy to think that the game's simplistic in that regard, because realistically, what you really want to do is, like, maybe in the short term, you just create space for the guy and you set him up. But then eventually, you want him to have that rhythm down. Then you can focus on your crosshair, hopefully, and you can go to work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well, like, the opera example is actually a really funny one that you brought up, right? Because I think with this meta now, I think a lot of operas are being a lot more aggressive these days. Sure. Right? They're not just being turrets and stuff like that. And I think that's a really good thing for IGLs to even have as well, right? An opera who's willing to take initiative, right? Because that frees them in some way where it's like, okay, I don't have to always think of a play for the Opera, right? This
Yes.
is not the days of, I was just thinking of like Cloud9 with Sean Gares and Scadoodle, where Sean Gares would be like, he would have to tell Scadoodle where
Yes.
to go and stuff like that, right? I think even having operas that are able to take that initiative helps take a load off the IGLs, helps kind of create and construct what the game plan will be in any given round.
This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadjou, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Travis Goff, Adam Ochs, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Hades, Jensen Goh, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Thooorin, William Peyton Lacy, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, and as always, special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming guests are? Maybe you want to take part in a lengthy donator discussion with me? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skilluminati today. Where? Via the Patreon link in the description box.